This retired police dog knew something was wrong. Then two little girls proved him right. Max's hackles rose for the first time in months, his amber eyes fixed on something in the forest that human senses couldn't detect. The German Shepherd search and rescue training had been officially retired due to a hip injury, but some instincts never truly sleep. As Emma and Sophie Chen followed their faithful companion deeper into Pine Ridge Forest, none of them could imagine they were walking toward a moment that would transform them from ordinary children into the kind of heroes the world desperately needed to remember. What Max had detected was the scent of blood, lots of it. What the twins would find was a dying police officer whose only hope lay in the hands of two 9-year-olds armed with nothing but their grandmother's medical wisdom and hearts too big to let a stranger die alone in the wilderness. Sometimes angels come with 4 legs and loyal hearts. Sometimes they come in pairs, carrying school backpacks and unlimited courage. The first thing you'd notice about the Chen apartment wasn't what it had, but what it held. Love so thick you could almost touch it, wrapped around every faded photograph and tucked into every corner where sunlight dared to creep through the threadbare curtains. On the 3rd floor of the old brick building at 247 Maple Street, where the radiator coughed like an elderly cat and the floorboards sang lullabies of creaking wood, 9-year-old twins Emma and Sophie Chen were learning that heroes don't always announce themselves with trumpets. Grace Chen stood at the kitchen counter that November morning, her 72-year-old hands trembling not from fear but from arthritis that had settled into her bones like winter fog. The scent of ginger tea mingled with the smell of old wood and something indefinable, the particular fragrance of a home where every penny was counted twice and every meal was a small miracle. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned that wasted motion was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Emma, sweetheart, can you help Sophie with her backpack?" Grace's voice carried the musical cadence of her Chinese heritage, softened by 40 years in Colorado. She slipped an unpaid electricity bill beneath a stack of her late daughter's recipe cards, a habit that had become as automatic as breathing. The twins didn't need to see the red "Final Notice" stamp glaring up from the envelope like an accusation. Emma looked up from where she was organizing their shared school supplies with military precision, every pencil aligned, every eraser in its designated place. At 9 years old, she already carried herself with the careful responsibility of someone who had learned too early that the world was not always kind to little girls without parents. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held nightmares about the parents they'd never see again. "Sophie, your sketch pad is upside down," Emma said gently, reaching over to help her twin sister, who was lost in thought as she drew delicate flowers in the margins of her worn notebook. Sophie looked up with eyes that held the same shape as Emma's, but carried an entirely different light. Dreamy, where Emma was practical, sensitive, where Emma was strong. Grace paused in her morning ritual to watch them, her heart expanding and contracting like a fist. On the windowsill sat a framed photograph of her daughter, their mother, Lisa, in her nurse's uniform, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed she would have forever to watch her babies grow up. Grace touched the frame with reverent fingers and whispered her morning prayer. "Keep them safe today, my darling. Help me be enough for them." The apartment bore witness to their careful dance of survival. Medical textbooks from Grace's nursing days were stacked to serve as a makeshift coffee table. The milk in their cereal was watered down just enough to stretch it through the week. Lights remained off in rooms they weren't using, and Grace's arthritic fingers had long ago learned to count coins with the expertise of a bank teller. "Remember, girls," Grace said, as she folded their laundry with the same reverence other people reserved for folding church linens, "pressure stops bleeding, elevation helps circulation. These hands," she held up her weathered fingers, "they've saved more lives than most doctors. Your mama had the same hands, you do too." Emma absorbed every word like a sponge, while Sophie's artistic mind transformed the lesson into a mental sketch of hands reaching out to heal. Neither twin fully understood yet that these quiet moments were preparing them for a day when the entire world would need to know their names. The morning light filtering through their windows held the promise of snow, and somewhere in the distance, Pine Ridge Forest whispered secrets that would change everything. Max began each day the way he had begun every morning for the past 3 years, with the solemn duty of a soldier who had never quite learned to retire. The German shepherd's amber eyes opened before dawn, and his graying muzzle lifted to test the air for threats that existed more in memory than reality. At 8 years old, he carried himself with the dignity of a dog who had once worn the badge of Colorado search and rescue, even though his working days had ended with a mountain accident that left him with a permanent limp and a heart too big for civilian life. His morning inspection was methodical and thorough. First, the small balcony where Grace grew herbs in coffee cans, basil and cilantro, that stretched their budget and their meals. His nose pressed against wind patterns that might carry news of avalanches or lost hikers, even though his days of racing through snow to find the missing were behind him. Next came the living room, where he padded silently across the worn carpet, his weathered collar bearing faded patches from his working days. K9 SAR Unit 47, and Max, hero in training. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew him. He'd been a hero long before the Chen family adopted him from the shelter where he'd been surrendered by handlers who couldn't afford a dog, who could no longer earn his keep. The twins' bedroom door stood slightly ajar, and Max nosed it open just enough to see Emma curled protectively around Sophie, even in sleep. His heart, if dogs' hearts could be said to understand such things, recognized the profound love between these two small humans who had lost their parents to a virus that had swept through their world like wildfire, leaving only an elderly grandmother and a broken-down search dog to stand guard. Grace emerged from the kitchen, moving slowly but with purpose, and Max approached her with the gentle deference he showed to all pack leaders worth following. She scratched behind his ears, checking the small bottle of arthritis medication they both shared, a bitter joke between species that neither found particularly funny. "Morning, my brave boy," she whispered, her fingers finding the spots that made his tail thump against the floor. "How are those old joints treating you?" "Own tails." Max had always chased the lost, the missing, the ones who needed finding. Today, something deep in his bones told him that particular skill might be needed again. Millbrook, Colorado, population 3,200, was the kind of place where secrets were currency, and everyone paid their debts in stories shared over coffee at Miller's Diner. Nestled between mountains that wore snow like jewelry, and valleys that cradled the town like protective arms, it was a place where children still rode bicycles without helmets, and neighbors still brought casseroles when someone was grieving. The kind of place where a 9-year-old could walk to school alone, and the biggest crime was usually teenagers spray painting their initials on the water tower. Emma checked her small digital watch, a birthday gift from Grace that had cost more than their grocery budget that week, and calculated the walking time to Pine Ridge Forest. Saturday afternoon walks had been a tradition started by their parents before the world changed. Before a virus taught children that grown-ups weren't as permanent as they seemed. Now these walks were Emma's way of keeping her sister connected to memories that might otherwise fade like watercolors in rain. Stay on the marked trails, be back before dark, and remember, Grace's voice carried from the doorway, and both twins finished the sentence in unison. We have each other. It was their family motto, their prayer, their promise. Sophie bent down and picked up a small stone from the sidewalk, turning it over in her palm until she found what she was looking for, the perfect heart shape that nature sometimes offered as a gift. "Mama used to collect these," she whispered, her voice holding the particular sadness that belonged to children who spoke of their parents in past tense. Emma silently took the stone and slipped it into her pocket, where it would eventually find its way into their memory box, alongside other treasures too precious to lose. The November air carried the sharp promise of snow, and the sky had taken on that peculiar gray-white color that made Colorado natives start mentally cataloging their emergency supplies. Emma's backpack held their survival kit, 2 bottles of water, granola bars she'd saved from school lunch, a first aid kit assembled from supplies Grace had accumulated during her nursing career, and a whistle that had never been used but felt important to carry. Sophie brought different provisions: a sketch pad with a chewed pencil stub, her imagination, and an artist's eye that could find beauty in pine needles and magic in morning frost. Where Emma saw potential dangers and calculated risks, Sophie saw possibilities and painted stories. Max trotted between them with increasing dishes, homing in on a distant signal. Pine Ridge Forest rose before them like a cathedral built by time itself. Towering ponderosa pines stretched toward heaven, their bark telling stories of survival through drought and fire, storm and season. Hidden trails wound through underbrush, where elk had worn paths to secret meadows, and local legends whispered of hikers who had entered the forest and found more than they were looking for, sometimes more than they ever returned to tell about. Emma felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders as they crossed from sidewalk to forest floor. Here she was not just Sophie's sister, but her guardian, her protector, the one who would make decisions that might mean the difference between adventure and tragedy. She adjusted her backpack straps and fell into the alert stance that Grace had taught her, aware but not anxious, prepared but not paranoid. Sophie pulled out her sketch pad and began walking more slowly, already lost in the artistic possibilities of shadow and light, bark and leaf, the way November afternoon sun filtered through branches like liquid gold. Her pencil moved across the page in quick, confident strokes that captured not just what she saw, but what she felt: the forest's ancient patience, its whispered secrets, its promise of magic for those who knew how to look. But as they followed the familiar trail deeper into the woods, Max's behavior grew more intense. His whine was low and urgent, and Emma found herself scanning the forest with new awareness. Something felt different today, heavier, more expectant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Emma," Sophie whispered, looking up from her sketch pad, "why does Max keep looking toward the dark part of the forest?" Emma followed her sister's gaze to where the marked trail curved away from the deeper wilderness, toward the sections where even experienced hikers were warned to be careful. Her protective instincts hummed with the same frequency as Max's anxiety. I don't know, she admitted, but her hand found the whistle in her backpack, and her mind began reviewing the emergency procedures Grace had drilled into them. But let's stick to our trail today. Sometimes the forest has its own plans. Neither twin could have imagined that those plans would transform them from ordinary children into the kind of heroes the world desperately needed to remember still existed. They walked deeper into Pine Ridge Forest, following a dog whose search and rescue instincts were about to prove that retirement had never really been an option, carrying hearts that would soon prove big enough to save a dying man and brave enough to change a town forever. The forest whispered its secrets to the wind, and somewhere ahead, Deputy Daniel Torres was running, familiar to him as his own reflection. At 4:47 a.m., the station was empty except for the night dispatcher and the ghosts of unsolved cases that haunted every small-town police department. Daniel's fingers, calloused from weekend carpentry jobs that helped him support his elderly mother, traced the topographical lines of Pine Ridge Forest with the precision of a man who had memorized every ridge, every valley, every place where secrets might hide. At 28, Daniel carried himself with the lean intensity of someone who had learned early that the world was not always just, but that didn't excuse a man from trying to make it better. His dark hair was cropped short in a style that spoke of military discipline. Though he'd never served, his father's disappearance had kept him home, tethered to Millbrook by duty and an obsession that gnawed at him like hunger. His brown eyes held depths that made people look away, not from fear, but from the uncomfortable recognition of someone who saw too much and felt too deeply. The case files spread before him told a story that the official reports refused to acknowledge. Miguel Torres, Sergeant, Millbrook Police Department, had not simply gone missing 5 years ago. He had been investigating the same network of caves, the same suspicious activity, the same whispered rumors of drugs flowing through their peaceful mountain town like poison through clean water. The official investigation had been closed after 6 months. The unofficial one had been consuming Daniel's life ever since. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment that wasn't standard issue for a routine patrol. The hidden camera disguised as a pen clip, extra ammunition that protocol didn't require, but instinct demanded. His father's old compass, the needle spinning to magnetic north with the same reliability that had once guided Miguel Torres through these same forests. Daniel had carried it every day since the disappearance, a talisman that connected him to a man who had died trying to do what was right. The radio crackled to life, and Sheriff Williams' gravelly voice cut through the pre-dawn quiet. "Torres, you copy." Daniel straightened, his jaw tightening with anticipation of another conversation he didn't want to have. "Copy, Sheriff. Remind me again what your patrol assignment is today." Daniel's eyes found the map coordinates he'd memorized but wasn't supposed to visit. "South Sector Residential Area, sir. Routine neighborhood patrol." "That's right. And remind me what Pine Ridge Forest has to do with residential patrol." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of arguments, warnings and direct orders that Daniel had skirted with the skill of someone who knew exactly how far he could push. "Investigations die with the investigator. You understand me?" "Yes, sir." The lie tasted bitter, but it was a necessary one. Daniel had learned long ago that sometimes protecting the people you loved meant lying to the people who could stop you from protecting them. He ended the call and stared at his reflection in a darkened window. Elena would be waking up in another hour, preparing for another day at the library, where she helped children discover that books could take them anywhere, even away from small towns where good men disappeared and bad men prospered. They'd been dating for 8 months, and she deserved better than a man who couldn't promise he'd come home every night. The engagement ring he'd been considering felt like another lie. How could he ask her to marry him when he might end up like his father? Daniel pulled out a sheet of paper and began writing, his handwriting careful and deliberate. Elena, if you're reading this, it means I made a choice you probably won't understand. I hope someday you'll forgive me. I love you. I should have said it while I had the chance. He sealed the letter and placed it in his glove compartment, next to the insurance papers and registration that every responsible adult carried, next to the normal life he might never get to live. The eastern horizon was beginning to blush with dawn as Daniel started his patrol car and pulled out of the station parking lot. For exactly 12 minutes, he followed his assigned route through the residential areas where good people slept safely in their beds, trusting that men like him stood between them and the darkness that crept in from the forests and mountains. Then he turned left instead of right, toward Pine Ridge Forest, toward the truth that had killed his father and might kill him too. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage. He thought of his mother, making breakfast for 1, in the kitchen where she'd once made breakfast for 3. He thought of Elena, who would spend today helping children find stories with happy endings. He thought of his father, who had driven down this same road 5 years ago and never come home. Some truths were worth dying for. Daniel Torres was about to discover if this was one of them. The Forest Service road ended where civilization gave up its claim on the wilderness, marked by nothing more than a rusted sign warning hikers to stay on marked trails. Daniel parked his patrol car behind a stand of aspen trees whose golden leaves had long since fallen, creating natural camouflage that might buy him precious minutes if anyone came looking. The November air bit at his exposed skin with the promise of snow, and he'd been looking for and immediately wished he hadn't. The cave system opened into the mountainside like a wound, its entrance partially concealed by strategically placed deadfall and camouflage netting that would be invisible from overhead surveillance. But it was what lay beyond the entrance that made Daniel's blood run cold. The cave had been transformed into something that belonged in a city, not a wilderness preserve. Industrial-grade ventilation systems hummed quietly, powered by generators that explained the tire tracks he'd been following. Sophisticated equipment lined makeshift tables. Chemical processing apparatus, digital scales, vacuum sealing machines. The operation was worth millions, possibly tens of millions, and had clearly been running for years, under the noses of every law enforcement agency in the state. Daniel activated his hidden camera and began documenting everything, his hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. License plates on vehicles that shouldn't exist in a place with no roads. Faces of many recognized from wanted posters. Security measures that suggested military or law enforcement training. This wasn't some backwoods methamphetamine lab run by local addicts. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise, with resources and connections that reached far beyond Millbrook. His father's compass trembled in his free hand as he mapped escape routes, calculating distances and cover options, with the tactical awareness that separated good cops from dead cops. The guards followed predictable patrol patterns, changing shifts every 2 hours with military precision. Their equipment was new, expensive, and included communication devices that suggested coordination with outside observers. That's when Daniel stepped on the branch. The snap echoed through the cave system like a gunshot, and the universe held its breath for the space between heartbeats. Then everything exploded into motion. "Motion sensor triggered in Sector 3. The radio call crackled through the cave system, followed by the sound of running boots and shouted orders. Daniel pocketed his camera and ran, crashing through underbrush with all the stealth of a wounded elk, his years of hiking these mountains now compressed into a desperate sprint for survival. Behind him, the forest erupted with the sounds of pursuit, radio chatter, breaking branches, and the distinctive whistle of bullets passing too close to his head. Daniel leaped over a fallen log, his ankle twisting on the uneven landing, sending spears of pain up his leg that he ignored, with the focused desperation of prey being hunted by predators who were better armed and better prepared. A low branch caught his forehead, arrived before the men behind him closed their trap. That's when he saw them waiting. 3 men emerged from concealment like wolves, their positions chosen with tactical precision to cut off every escape route Daniel's panicked mind could calculate. The leader was a man Daniel recognized from his father's old case files. Vincent Morrison, ex-military, ex-police, current nightmare, in tactical gear and dead eyes. "Deputy Torres," Morrison's voice carried the casual tone of someone discussing weather, not murder. "You're a long way from your assigned patrol route." Daniel's hand moved toward his service weapon, knowing it was hopeless, but unable to surrender without fighting. "Vincent Morrison, you're under arrest for—" The first baton caught him across the ribs with enough force to crack bone. The second found his kidney, dropping him to his knees in agony. The third struck the back of his head, and stars exploded across his vision like fireworks celebrating his own destruction. "Nothing personal, Deputy. Business is business." Morrison's voice seemed to come from underwater as Daniel tried to crawl toward his dropped weapon. The gunshot that followed was surprisingly quiet, more like a cough than the thunder Daniel had expected. The bullet tore through his abdomen, and suddenly the forest floor felt comfortable, welcoming, like a bed he'd been walking toward his entire life. Somehow, with strength born of desperation and love, Daniel dragged himself toward the ancient oak tree that had stood witness to a century of mountain winters. His emergency beacon felt heavy as lead in his trembling fingers, but he managed to activate it before consciousness began its slow fade. His last coherent thought wasn't of his own pain, but of his father lying somewhere in these same woods, of his mother waiting for another son who might never come home, of a truth that had finally found its voice but might die with the only man left alive to speak it. The world had become a place of fragments, snapshots of consciousness floating on a sea of pain that ebbed and flowed like tides against a distant shore. Daniel Torres lay beneath the oak tree that had become his confessor, his witness, and possibly his gravestone, watching his life drain away in crimson drops that the November earth drank with ancient thirst. His service shirt, once pressed and professional, now served as a makeshift bandage pressed against the wound that was stealing his future one heartbeat at a time. The pressure helped, but not enough. Nothing would be enough unless help arrived soon. and Daniel's fading awareness calculated the odds with the brutal honesty of a dying man. His radio lay shattered somewhere in the forest. His patrol car was miles away. His backup didn't know he needed backing up. The cold was creeping in from his extremities, fingers blood loss to see which would claim him first, and Daniel found himself oddly curious about which would win. His academy training had covered this scenario in clinical detail, but no textbook had mentioned how strangely peaceful it felt once the initial panic faded. Through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, his father's face materialized among the bare branches above. Not a hallucination born of blood loss, but a memory so vivid it felt like presence. Miguel Torres had possessed the same stubborn determination that had driven Daniel to this place. The same inability to let injustice flourish in the darkness while good men slept safely in their beds. "Mijo," his mother's voice drifted through the forest like smoke, singing the Spanish lullabies that had once made him feel invincible in a world that had seemed infinitely safe. "Sleep, my child, sleep, my son, sleep, piece of my heart. Sleep, my child, sleep, my son, sleep, little piece of my heart." She would sing it again tonight, not knowing she was singing it for a ghost. The wind through the bare branches carried the scent of pine needles and approaching snow, the clean smell of a world that would continue turning, long after Daniel Torres became nothing more than another name on a memorial wall. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear his attackers conducting a methodical search, their voices growing fainter as they expanded their perimeter, confident that a wounded cop would either die quietly or bleed out long before he could pose any further threat. Elena's face joined his father's among the dancing shadows, her brown eyes holding the disappointment that would replace love when she realized he'd lied to her about routine patrol, about staying safe, about having a future they could share. The engagement ring he'd been considering would stay in the jewelry store display case, gathering dust, while she learned to love someone who could promise to come home every night and mean it. His regrets lined up like accusations, never telling Elena he loved her, never solving his father's case, never keeping his promise to his mother that he'd be careful, never having children who might grow up to be the kind of people who saved dying strangers in forests, never growing old enough to understand what his father had felt in those final moments when duty demanded everything and offered nothing in return. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding thermal currents with effortless grace, and Daniel wondered if it was the same bird that had watched his father die in these same woods 5 years ago. Hawks were said to carry messages between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Perhaps this one would tell Miguel Torres that his son had finally found the truth, even if he hadn't lived long enough to share it. The November sun was disappearing behind clouds that promised snow, and Daniel's vision began to narrow like a camera lens slowly closing. His breathing had become shallow, irregular, kind of breathing that meant his body was beginning the process of shutting down non-essential systems to preserve whatever spark of life remained. "If I don't make it," he whispered to the hawk, to his father, to the forest itself, "at least I tried to do what was right." The words were barely audible, but they felt important, like an epitaph worth carving into stone or memory. The forest grew quiet around him, settling into the kind of silence that suggested the presence of something sacred. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath in respect for a man who had chosen duty over safety, truth over comfort, courage over survival. Then, carried on the wind like a gift from whatever gods watched over dying cops and broken families, Daniel heard something that made him think he was already dead and dreaming. The distant sound of children's laughter, bright and innocent, and full of the kind of hope that kept the world turning, even when good men fell in dark places. His consciousness faded like sunset, but somewhere in the darkness that claimed him, Deputy Daniel Torres smiled. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of Pine Ridge Forest like liquid gold, casting dancing shadows on the trail where Emma and Sophie Chen had walked 100 times before. Sophie moved with the unhurried pace of someone who saw art in everything, stopping every few steps to examine a particularly vibrant maple leaf or sketch the way sunlight carved patterns in bark. Her nature journal, a composition notebook covered in stickers and held together with tape, was already half filled with the treasures of autumn that most adults hurried past without seeing. Emma checked her small digital watch and calculated their remaining daylight with the precision of someone who had learned that being responsible meant being the one others could count on. 15 more minutes, Sophie. Then we need to head back. Grandma Grace said dinner at 6, and you know how she worries when we're late. Max trotted between them with the easy confidence of a dog who knew these trails by heart. But Emma noticed the subtle changes in his demeanor that spoke of something different about today. His ears swiveled constantly, sampling sounds that human hearing couldn't detect. His nose worked overtime, processing scents that carried messages from the deeper forest where civilization ended and wildness began. Look at this one, Emma. Sophie held up a leaf that had turned the exact shade of orange that existed nowhere else in nature. Her artist's eye, finding magic in the mundane. It's like someone painted it with sunset. Emma smiled, despite her growing unease. Sophie's ability to entire body going rigid with an alertness that made Emma's protective instincts flare like warning signals. His hackles rose in a ridge along his spine, and his lips pulled back in a silent snarl, directed toward the section of forest where the marked trail curved away from deeper wilderness. Then he barked, not the playful sound he made when chasing squirrels, but the urgent, commanding bark of a search and rescue dog who had found what he was looking for. Max never acts like this, Emma said, her voice tight with concern. Something's wrong. Sophie clutched her nature journal to her chest, her artistic intuition reading danger in the air like others might read weather. What if it's a wild animal? What if there's a bear or a mountain lion? But Max was already pushing through the underbrush, following a scent trail that led away from their safe, familiar path, toward the part of the forest where parents warned children not to venture. His urgent whines carried a message that transcended species. Follow me, someone needs help now. Emma grabbed Sophie's hand and made the decision that would change their lives forever. We follow Max, he was trained for this, he knows when someone's in trouble. They pushed through thorny branches that caught their jackets and scratched their arms, following their dog deeper into the forest, where the afternoon shadows grew longer and the air carried a metallic scent that Emma didn't want to identify but recognized from the day Grace had cut her hand preparing dinner and blood had dripped onto the kitchen floor. Then they saw him. Deputy Daniel Torres lay crumpled beneath an ancient oak tree like a broken doll cast aside by careless hands. His uniform was torn and stained with blood that had turned the forest floor dark and sticky. His face was pale as winter snow, and his breathing was so shallow that Emma had to watch his chest carefully to see if he was alive at all. Sophie's gasp echoed through the forest, and her nature journal fell from nerveless fingers to land among the fallen leaves. Tears started immediately, not from fear, but from the kind of empathy that belonged to children who had already lost too much and couldn't bear to witness more loss. Emma dropped to her knees beside the wounded man, her mind automatically cycling through the lessons Grace had drilled into them during laundry folding and dishwashing. Check for breathing, shallow but present. Check for pulse, weak but steady. Assess the injuries, blood loss, massive trauma, possibly internal bleeding. Is he dead? Sophie whispered, her voice breaking on the words. Emma pressed her ear to Daniel's chest and heard the flutter of a heart that was fighting to keep beating. No, but barely alive. Sophie were the only ones who can help him. Max circled the unconscious man with the protective instincts of a dog who understood that which danger might come. His amber eyes scanning the forest for threats while his charges worked to save a life. Emma felt the weight of decision settle on her 9-year-old shoulders like a mantle she'd never asked to wear. This man would die without help, and they were the only help available. The nearest hiking trail was half a mile away. Their old flip phone had spotty service in the forest. Daniel Torres had minutes, not hours. Sophie? Emma's voice carried the authority that came with being the protector, the decision-maker, the one who had to be strong when everything else fell apart. I need you to be brave now, braver than you've ever been. This man is going to die if we don't help him. Sophie wiped her tears with the back of her hand and nodded with the solemn determination of someone who understood that childhood had just ended and responsibility had begun. What do we do? Emma was already removing her wool scarf, her mind transforming from that of a frightened child to that of an emergency responder who happened to be 9 years old. We save his life. Emma's fingers moved with surprising steadiness as she folded her wool scarf into a makeshift pressure bandage, Grace's voice echoing in her memory like a prayer made of practical wisdom. Direct pressure stops bleeding, elevation helps circulation, and panic kills more patients than injuries ever could. The scarf, hand-knitted by Grace during long winter evenings, had been a Christmas gift meant to keep Emma warm. Now it became the barrier between life and death for a stranger whose badge read, Torres, D. Sophie, the phone, Emma commanded, her voice carrying an authority that belonged to someone far older than her 9 years. Call 911. Tell them we have a police officer shot in Pine Ridge Forest, approximately 2 miles from the main trailhead, near the old oak grove. Sophie's hands shook as she pulled out their ancient flip phone, its scratched screen and worn keypad suddenly feeling like the most important technology in the world. Her artistic fingers, so steady when drawing delicate flower petals, trembled as she dialed the numbers that could summon help from beyond the forest. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's professional calm carried across the weak signal like a lifeline. There's a police officer, Sophie's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. He's hurt really bad. There's so much blood. Take a deep breath, honey. Can you tell me your location? Emma pressed the scarf against Daniel's abdominal wound, feeling the warm wetness seep through the wool as she coached her sister. Tell them Pine Ridge Forest, 2 miles from the main trailhead, near the big oak tree that's been split by lightning. Tell them to follow the deer path northwest from marker 7. Sophie repeated the information with increasing steadiness, her natural empathy translating into clear communication under Emma's guidance. While she spoke to the dispatcher, Emma assessed their limited resources with the tactical thinking of someone who had learned to make do with less than enough. Daniel's belt could serve as a tourniquet base, but she needed something to create leverage. Sophie's art pencil, thick and sturdy, would work as a windlass. Emma worked with mechanical precision, threading the belt around Daniel's thigh above the wound, using the pencil to twist it tight enough to slow the bleeding without cutting off circulation entirely. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware enough to register the 2 small faces above him. He tried to speak, his voice barely a whisper that carried the weight of urgent warning. Dangerous. They might come back. Hide. Emma met his gaze with the serious brown eyes that had already seen too much loss. "We're not leaving you. You're going to be okay." But his words planted seeds of fear that bloomed immediately in Sophie's imagination. "Emma, what if the bad people who hurt him are still here? What if they come back?" Emma's mind raced through possibilities and probabilities, calculating risk versus duty in the way that children of trauma learn to do before they should have to understand such concepts. The logical choice was to hide, to protect themselves and their sister. The right choice was to stay and fight for a life that hung by threads thinner than Sophie's art pencils. "Then Max will warn us, and we'll deal with it when it happens," Emma said with more confidence than she felt. "Right now, this man needs us more than we need to be safe." She used clean leaves to wipe blood away from smaller cuts, her memory supplying Grace's lessons about preventing infection. Sophie tore strips from her favorite t-shirt, the one with the rainbow that their mother had bought her before the world changed, creating additional bandages with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who understood that material things mattered less than human lives. Max's ears twitched at the sound of approaching footsteps, and both girls froze until a deer stepped delicately through the underbrush, assessed the scene with liquid dark eyes, and disappeared back into the forest like a woodland spirit, offering its blessing to their efforts. "Sophie," Emma said as she worked, "remember what Mama used to tell us?" Sophie nodded, her voice joining Emma's as they recited the words that had become their family creed. "Sometimes ordinary people have to do extraordinary things." The sound of sirens reached them like answered prayers, growing stronger as emergency vehicles navigated the Forest Service roads that would bring help to this remote corner of wilderness. Emma felt relief flood through her system, followed immediately by the realization that their quiet life was a manageable trickle. Emma's scarf was soaked through with blood, but it had done its job. "We did it," Sophie whispered, wonder mixing with exhaustion in her voice. Emma looked down at their hands, stained with blood, scraped from thorns, but steady with the knowledge that they had acted when action was required. "Yes," she agreed, "we did it." But even as the sirens grew louder and help approached through the forest, Emma sensed that they had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. They were no longer just the Chen twins, the orphaned sisters who lived with their grandmother above the old brick building on Maple Street. They had become something else, something that would require them to be braver and stronger than children should have to be. The forest held its breath around them, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of help arriving mixed with the whispered promise of challenges yet to come. The EMT team arrived like cavalry in a Western movie, crashing through the underbrush with medical equipment and professional competence that transformed the forest clearing into an impromptu emergency room. Sarah Martinez, the lead paramedic, was a compact woman in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair and hands that moved with the precision of someone who had spent 20 years turning chaos into order, death into life, hopelessness into possibility. Her partner, Jake Wilson, was younger but equally skilled, and together they approached the scene with the kind of focused intensity that meant the difference between successful saves and tragic losses. Sarah knelt beside Daniel, her trained eyes immediately assessing the makeshift medical work that had kept him alive. "Somebody did good work here," she announced, her professional composure unable to hide her genuine amazement. This tourniquet saved his life. Who applied first aid? Emma said simply, as if every 9-year-old learned battlefield medicine while folding laundry. Sarah's eyebrows rose as she looked more closely at the two small girls, whose clothes were stained with blood, and whose eyes held depths that belonged to much older souls. "How old are you two?" "9, Emma replied, her hand finding Sophie's for mutual support. 9. Sarah repeated the word like she was testing its meaning. "Jake, we've got 2 9-year-olds who just performed trauma medicine that would make most adults panic." As they loaded Daniel onto a stretcher, he fought against the sedative long enough to focus on the faces that had pulled him back from the edge of eternity. Her young voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to give orders to adults. "You're going to be okay. The doctors will take good care of you." Daniel's eyes closed, but his lips curved in something that might have been a smile. Sheriff Williams arrived with Deputy Parker, their uniforms and badges transforming the forest clearing into an official crime scene. The sheriff was a man in his 60s who had seen enough of human nature to be surprised by very little. But the sight of 2 small girls, covered in blood and wearing expressions of calm competence, left him momentarily speechless. "We'll need to get statements," he said gently, recognizing that he was dealing with children who had been through trauma. "Can you tell me what happened?" Emma's account was precise and chronological, delivered with the kind of clarity that belonged to someone who understood that details mattered. Sophie's contribution was more artistic. She remembered colors and shadows, the exact angle of Daniel's fall, the way the light fell through the oak leaves. Together, their testimonies painted a picture that would become crucial evidence in the investigation that would follow. Max received his own share of attention from the paramedics, who recognized the protective behavior of a trained search and rescue dog. "He's the one who found the officer," Emma explained. "He knew someone needed help." Word spread through Millbrook with the speed that belonged to small towns where everyone's business was everyone's concern. By the time the ambulance pulled away with Daniel stabilized but critical, neighbors had begun gathering at the forest edge, like worried relatives waiting for news of family. Jessica Lane from the Millbrook Gazette arrived with her camera and the keen instincts of a reporter who recognized a story that would resonate far beyond their small community. She approached the twins with the respectful caution of someone who understood that she was in the presence of something rare and precious. Genuine heroism in an age that had almost forgotten what it looked like. That's when Grace arrived, running through the forest with a speed that defied her arthritis and her 72 years. She gathered both granddaughters in her arms, her relief so profound that it left her speechless for long moments. "You saved a man's life," she whispered into their hair. "But you could have been hurt. You could have been killed." Emma pulled back to meet her grandmother's eyes, her young face serious with new understanding. "We couldn't leave him, Grandma Grace. He would have died." The ride home in Grace's old Honda was filled with the kind of silence that belonged to people processing life-changing events. Each of them understood, in their own way, that they had crossed a line that would forever divide their lives into before. "Heroes," she said softly, "don't get to choose when the world needs them. Sometimes ordinary people have to do extraordinary things, just like your mama used to say." The phone began ringing before they finished dinner. Reporters, neighbors, officials from the mayor's office. Each call brought the same message: The Chen twins had become something larger than themselves, symbols of courage and hope in a world that desperately needed both. That night, Emma wrote in her journal with hands that still trembled slightly from the afternoon's adrenaline. Today we learned that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared. I think Mama and Papa would be proud. I hope we can be the kind of heroes they would want us to be. Outside their window, the lights of Millbrook twinkled like earthbound stars. And somewhere in the hospital across town, Deputy Daniel Torres slept peacefully for the first time in years. Alive because two 9-year-old girls had decided that a stranger's life was worth risking their own safety to protect. The world had found its newest heroes, and they wore tennis shoes instead of capes, carried school backpacks instead of weapons, and proved that courage came in the smallest packages, but made the biggest difference. Sunday morning arrived in the Chen apartment with all the subtlety of a marching band. Emma woke first, as she always did, her internal alarm clock calibrated to the rhythms of responsibility that had become her second nature. But today felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself carried weight that hadn't been there yesterday. She padded to the kitchen in her worn pajamas, expecting to find Grace preparing their usual breakfast of oatmeal, stretched with extra water and flavored with hope. Instead, she found her grandmother sitting at their small table, staring at the front page of the Millbrook Gazette with an expression that mixed pride and terror in equal measures. The headline screamed in bold letters that seemed too large for their quiet lives. Twin angels save deputy's life. Below the words was a photograph that made Emma's stomach clench with recognition. Herself and Sophie, blood-stained and serious, standing beside the stretcher that carried Daniel Torres toward salvation. They looked so small in the image, so impossibly young to be carrying the weight of a man's life in their 9-year-old hands. "Grandma Grace?" Emma's voice carried the uncertainty of someone who sensed that everything familiar was about to change. Grace looked up with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "Oh, sweetheart, come here." She pulled Emma onto her lap, despite the girl's protests that she was too old for such comfort, and began reading aloud in a voice that trembled with emotions she couldn't quite name. Two 9-year-old twins from Millbrook proved yesterday that heroes come in the small. Critically injured in Pine Ridge Forest. Emma and Sophie Chen, using first aid skills taught by their grandmother, applied life-saving medical treatment that doctors credit with preventing the officer's death from blood loss. Sophie emerged from the bedroom, rubbing sleep from eyes that widened as she took in the scene. The newspaper, Grace's emotional state, Emma's pale face. "Are we in trouble?" she whispered, her artist's intuition reading the tension in the room like colors on a palette. Before Grace could answer, the phone rang with the shrill insistence of urgency. Then it rang again and again. Each call brought the same message delivered in different voices. Reporters wanting interviews, well-wishers offering congratulations, officials from the mayor's office discussing ceremonies and recognitions that felt as foreign to the Chen family as life on another planet. Grace fielded each call with increasing protective fury, a grandmother's instincts flaring like a mama bear defending cubs. "No interviews without my permission. No, you cannot speak to the children directly. Yes, they're heroes, but they're also 9 years old, and they need their privacy." Max positioned himself between the front door and the twins, with the tactical awareness of his search and rescue training, his amber eyes scanning for threats that might approach from any direction. His protective instincts had been activated by the strange energy in the apartment, the sense that his pack was under a different kind of pressure than they'd faced before. The first gift delivery arrived before they finished their now cold oatmeal. A massive bouquet of flowers from Millbrook General Hospital, accompanied by a card signed by every member of the nursing staff. "Thank you for showing us what courage looks like," the message read in careful handwriting. "Deputy Torres is stable and improving because of your brave hearts." Emma studied the flowers with the practical concern that had become her default response to anything unusual. "Grandma Grace, what if the bad people who hurt the policeman see our picture in the newspaper? What if they come looking for us?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. Grace felt her protective instincts sharpen to a fine edge, even as she struggled to balance her granddaughter's safety with their right to be celebrated for their extraordinary courage. Sophie began crying then, not from fear, but from a deeper well of emotion that connected her to parents she could barely remember. Mama and Papa would be proud, wouldn't they? They would want people to know that we tried to help someone. Grace gathered both girls in her arms, feeling the weight of decisions that would shape their futures in ways she couldn't yet understand. To understand what that meant. "We're going to do one interview," Grace decided, her voice carrying the authority that came with years of making impossible choices. "One interview with someone we trust, to inspire other children to be brave and kind. But after that, we protect our privacy and our normal lives as much as we can." Emma and Sophie exchanged glances that spoke of their growing understanding that normal might be a luxury they could no longer afford. They had saved a life, and now the world wanted to know who they were, where they came from, and how two ordinary girls had found the courage to do something extraordinary. Grace spent the next hour preparing them for their first media appearance, brushing their hair with gentle strokes that felt like prayers, choosing their best dresses, the ones usually reserved for church and special occasions. Emma's was navy blue, with small white flowers. Sophie's was soft green that brought out her eyes. Both dresses had been carefully mended where children's adventures had left their marks. As Grace worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was dressing her granddaughters for a performance that would change them forever. Fame was a double-edged sword that could lift up or cut down, and she prayed silently that her girls were strong enough to handle whatever came next. The weight of sudden recognition pressed down on their small apartment like humidity before a storm. And somewhere in the back of Grace's mind, a worry began to grow that the attention that celebrated her granddaughter's courage might also expose them to dangers they weren't prepared to face. The Millbrook Community Center had been transformed into something that resembled a real television studio, complete with professional lighting that made the familiar space feel foreign and important. Jessica Lane, the reporter who had covered their story the day before, greeted them with the gentle warmth of someone who understood that she was interviewing children who had been through trauma, not politicians seeking publicity. "I want you to know," Jessica said as she knelt to their eye level, "that we're only going to talk about what you're comfortable sharing. If you want to stop at any time, we stop, okay?" The setup was deliberately comfortable. Soft chairs arranged in a semicircle, warm lighting that felt more like sunset than surgical examination, and most importantly, space for Max to sit beside his charges, where he could provide the emotional support that no human could replicate. Sophie clutched her sketchbook to her chest like a shield, her fingers finding comfort in the familiar texture of paper. She worked to save a life. "I drew this last night," Sophie whispered, showing a sketch of Max standing guard while she and Emma worked. "He was so brave. He knew someone needed help before we did." Emma's account was characteristically precise and methodical, each step of their rescue efforts described with clinical accuracy that belied her 9 years. Grandma Grace taught us that pressure stops bleeding and elevation helps circulation. We had to use what we knew to keep him alive until real help could arrive. "What were you thinking when you first saw Deputy Torres?" Jessica asked gently. Emma's response came without hesitation: that we couldn't let him die alone. Everyone deserves to have someone trying to help them, even if we're just kids. The emotional moment came when Jessica, with infinite care, asked about their parents. Both girls' eyes filled with tears that they tried bravely to hold back, and Grace immediately stepped forward from her position just off camera. "That's enough about that topic," Grace said firmly, her protective instincts overriding any consideration of good television. Jessica nodded respectfully and moved on, understanding that some subjects were too tender for public consumption. Max seemed to sense the shift in emotional energy and moved closer to Sophie, his large head nudging her hand in the gentle way that therapy dogs learn to provide comfort. The camera caught the moment, and Jessica couldn't help but smile at the dog's intuitive understanding of when his family needed extra support. "People are calling you heroes," Jessica continued. "How does that make you feel?" Emma's response would later be quoted in newspapers across the country. "We're not heroes. We just didn't want someone to die alone. Heroes are people like firefighters and doctors who choose to help people every day. We just did what anyone should do." Sophie's addition was characteristically focused on others. Max helped too. He's the bravest dog ever, and the paramedics were the real heroes. They knew how to really save him. Technical difficulties arose when Sophie's natural shyness caused her to whisper her responses, requiring Emma to translate and encourage her sister with the patience of someone much older than her years. The crew found themselves charmed by the girl's unfailing politeness. They said please and thank you to everyone, apologized for any inconvenience, and treated the expensive equipment with the careful respect of children who had learned that breaking things had consequences. Behind the scenes, Grace watched with the fierce attention of a lioness, ready to end the interview at the first sign that her granddaughters were being pushed beyond their comfort zones. Her pride in their courage was matched only by her determination to protect them from exploitation. The interview concluded with a question that revealed the girl's true priorities. Is someone who had held a man's life in her hands? "We hope so. We've been praying for him." Sophie added softly, "We want to visit him when he feels better, to make sure he's really okay." As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, the phones at Channel 7 began ringing with responses that would continue for weeks. Social media exploded with shares and comments from viewers who had been moved by the combination of innocence and courage displayed by two 9-year-old girls and their faithful dog. The interview had captured something that the world desperately needed to see: proof that goodness still existed, that children could still be raised to put others before themselves, and that heroes really did come in the smallest, most unexpected packages. But as Grace gathered her granddaughters for the ride home, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had just opened a door that might be very difficult to close again. Within hours of the interview's broadcast, the Chen twin story had transcended local news and entered the realm of viral phenomena. The video was shared thousands of times across every social media platform, accompanied by comments that restored faith in humanity, one view at a time. "These girls are angels," wrote a viewer from California. "Faith in humanity restored," added someone from New York. "This is what courage looks like," proclaimed a teacher from Texas who planned to show the video to her students. Millbrook's business community responded with the kind of immediate generosity that defined small-town character. Miller's Hardware delivered supplies for a treehouse to the Chen apartment, along with a note from owner Bob Miller. "Every hero needs a fortress. This one's on the house." Patterson's Bakery began delivering fresh bread daily, warm loaves that filled the apartment with the scent of community support made tangible. At Millbrook Elementary School, Principal Anderson called an emergency assembly to address the fact that they now had genuine celebrities walking their halls. "We have real heroes among us," she announced to an auditorium full of students whose eyes searched for Emma and Sophie with new respect and curiosity. "Let's remember that heroes are made by the choices they make, and all of us have the chance to make heroic choices every single day." The twins' classmates reacted with a complex mixture of emotions that belonged to children trying to process the sudden fame of their peers. Some responded with genuine admiration and increased protectiveness. Others struggled with jealousy that their friends had achieved something so extraordinary. Most fell somewhere in between, treating Emma and Sophie with a new kind of respect, while still expecting them to share their crayons and help with math homework. Grace found herself caught in an emotional whirlwind of gratitude and overwhelm. The support was genuine and deeply appreciated. Their mailbox overflowed with letters from around the country, many containing small donations, despite her stated wishes that none be sent. Children from other schools sent drawings and cards. Adults shared stories of times when strangers had helped them in moments of need. Max experienced his own version of celebrity as the hero dog. Children approached him on walks with the kind of reverence usually reserved for meeting famous athletes or movie stars. He accepted the attention with the dignity befitting a dog who had always understood that service was its own reward, though he remained vigilant for any threats to his beloved family. In his hospital room, Daniel Torres watched the interview on a nurse's phone, tears streaming down his face as he listened to the two small voices that had called him back from the edge of eternity. His determination to recover doubled with each viewing, fueled by the need to thank them properly and to prove worthy of the courage they had shown on his behalf. Detective Maria Santos watched the coverage with professional concern mixing with personal admiration. While she celebrated the twins' bravery, she worried about the visibility their fame might bring from the criminal elements who had tried to kill Daniel. The investigation was ongoing, and dangerous people were still at large. Fame could be as much a target as a blessing for children who had witnessed too much. Community meetings sprouted organically as Millbrook residents organized support for the Chen family while trying to respect their need for privacy. The town had claimed the twins as their own, and with that claim came protective instincts that ran as deep as mountain roots. Emma struggled with the expectations that came with being labeled a hero. She felt the weight of others' assumptions that she would always be brave, always make the right choice, always live up to an image that felt larger than her 9-year-old frame could carry. The attention made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Sophie, by contrast, blossomed under the positive attention. Her natural empathy found expression in the letters she dictated to Grace in response to the children who had written to her. Her artwork took on new themes of helping and healing, hope and courage. Each evening, Grace read selected letters to the girls, carefully filtering out anything inappropriate, while sharing the messages of support and encouragement that came from around the world. Teachers wrote about showing the video to their students. Parents shared stories of their own children's newfound interest in first aid and helping others. Medical professionals expressed amazement at the twins' life-saving actions. But in the shadows of their newfound fame, unknown figures watched the coverage with different intentions. Men in expensive suits took note of the Chen family's targets for those who preferred their criminal activities remain hidden. As night fell over Millbrook, the Chen family settled into an evening routine that felt both familiar and forever changed. They were still the same people who had woken up that morning, but the world now knew their names, their faces, their story. Fame had found them whether they wanted it or not, and with it came both blessings and dangers they were only beginning to understand. The ripples of their goodness spread outward like circles in a pond, touching lives in ways they would never know, inspiring courage in hearts that had forgotten how to hope. But some ripples, they would soon discover, reached shores where darkness waited to respond with its own plans for two small girls who had seen too much and saved too much to be allowed to live quietly ever again. The world had embraced its newest heroes, but heroes, Emma and Sophie, were about to learn sometimes paid prices that ordinary people never had to consider. Detective Maria Santos had learned long ago that justice wore many faces, but it always carried the same weight. Heavy as stone, warm as hope, sharp as the memory of promises made to the dead. At 35, she carried the quiet strength of someone raised by a grandmother's love after losing her parents to twisted metal and broken glass. Her Millbrook PD office reflected a life spent standing between the innocent and the darkness. Photos of solved cases hung like trophies. Commendations from her Denver days marked her as a detective who never looked away. But the most important photo sat on her desk. Elena Santos, her grandmother, whose hands were worn from work, yet strong enough to raise an orphaned child into a woman who fought for justice. In Maria's pocket, Elena's rosary lay smooth from decades of prayers. The case file before her made her protective instincts flare. Daniel Torres, young, idealistic, hadn't been the victim of random violence. His attack was planned, executed with inside knowledge, and tied to organized crime, far beyond Millbrook's borders. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. Daniel lay propped on pillows, eyes haunted. "I should have waited for backup," he whispered. "Now my mother thinks she's going to lose another son. And those little girls." His voice broke. Maria leaned closer. "This wasn't random. Someone with police access planned your ambush." Daniel fumbled for his phone. "I got photos before they found me." The images froze Maria's blood. An elaborate drug operation hidden in the Pine Ridge cave system, license plates from far-off states, faces from federal wanted lists, equipment tied to cartels. "This is bigger than we thought," she said, already calculating federal involvement, and the short window before the criminals vanished. But one thought cut through the strategy. "They're just kids," he said, knowing innocence meant nothing to men like this. Maria opened another file, cold for 5 years. Miguel Torres, Daniel's father, had disappeared, investigating the same area. The parallels were too exact to ignore. "Your father's case, this location, it's all connected, and I won't let those girls become victims for their heroism. You have my word." Pine Ridge Forest looked more like a war zone than a preserve. Mist clung to the trees as Maria stood at the cave entrance, her eyes cataloging every detail. "Jackson, photograph everything, equipment, tracks, footprints. "Murphy, lock down the perimeter. No one enters without my say." Inside, industrial ventilation hummed. Tables held chemical processing gear, the air acrid with drug fumes. Jackson called her deeper in, DNA from multiple suspects, fingerprints tied to interstate crime networks, ballistics linked to weapons used as far as Phoenix. "This is professional, multi-million-dollar trafficking," Maria said, "with cartel connections." Worse was the proof of betrayal, leaks from inside law enforcement. Miguel Torres' buried badge confirmed what she'd suspected. Daniel's father had died here, his disappearance covered up. "How many others?" she murmured. Chemical waste had poisoned streams, driven wildlife out, and armed guards had turned the forest into a kill zone. Maria documented everything, knowing criminals this sophisticated wouldn't stay exposed for long. They'd already know Daniel lived, and the site was compromised. "Get me the DEA in Denver," she told Jackson. "Murphy, call the FBI Organized Crime Task Force." But bringing in outside help risked tipping off moles inside the system and putting Emma and Sophie in greater danger. By evening, Maria stood outside the Chen's small brick apartment. She'd traded her uniform for jeans and a leather jacket, her weapon concealed. Grace Chen answered the door with wary eyes. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Detective Maria Santos. I'd like to talk about your granddaughter's safety." "They're heroes, not criminals," Grace said. Maria offered a photo of her own grandmother holding her as a child. "My grandmother raised me too. I know that kind of love." Inside, the home smelled of ginger tea. Max, the family's German shepherd, studied her before granting a tentative wag. Emma emerged with serious brown eyes. Sophie hung back, reading the room. "Are you here about the bad men who hurt Deputy Torres?" Emma asked. "Yes," Maria said, kneeling. "I want to keep you safe while we catch them." She explained the danger without frightening them more than necessary. Grace went pale. "You're telling me my granddaughters might be in danger because they saved a man's life?" "I'm telling you nothing will happen to them," Maria replied. 24/7 protection, unmarked patrols, direct line to me." She outlined school safety plans, emergency codes, and rapid response protocols. "What if they try to hurt Grandma Grace?" Emma pressed. "We've planned for that too," Maria assured her. Sophie quietly drew at the table. When she finished, she handed Maria a picture. A dark-haired figure with wings shielding two girls from shadowy shapes. "That's you," she whispered. "You're our guardian angel." The simple trust struck Maria deeply. "What if we just want to be normal kids again?" Emma asked. "Normal is what we're fighting for," Maria said. "The right to grow up safe, to play and dream without fear." By the time Maria left, she knew these weren't just witnesses. They were children she was bound to protect. Parking across the street, she settled in for a long watch, rosary in her pocket, service weapon at her side, and her promise burning like armor around her heart. The abandoned warehouse on Millbrook's outskirts stood like a monument to broken promises, its rusted walls scarred by decades of neglect. Inside, shadows crowded around a table where evil wore human faces and plotted the deaths of innocents with military precision. Vince Morrison commanded the room with the cold authority of a man who had traded his special operations past for a badge, and then for power unbound by law. His gray eyes were as flat as steel. "Gentlemen," he said, "we have a problem." Carl Brennan, his lieutenant, opened a folder of surveillance photos. The Torres kid survived, as expected. But the bigger issue is these twins, Emma and Sophie Chen. They found him, went to the media, gave detailed accounts. They know too much. Morrison studied the photos. Two 9-year-old girls guilty only of refusing to let a man die alone. Children are loose ends. Loose ends get people killed. The question isn't if, but how to remove them without bringing federal heat. A hush fell. The blizzard forecast was their opportunity. Morrison spread weather maps across the table. Historic storm, Power outages, emergency services crippled. Looks like a tragic accident. Family frozen when the heat fails. No witnesses, no evidence. Brennan briefed the rest. Grace Chen, the grandmother, works nights at the community center. Old heating system in her building. Santos is the only protection. One detective can't be everywhere. And the dog? Morrison asked. German Shepherd, retired search and rescue, protective but old and injured. Morrison nodded. Perfect. By the time anyone reaches them, nature will have erased everything. One of the younger men, Tommy Vasquez, murmured, "They're just kids." Morrison's hand brushed his pistol. "The last man who questioned me feeds fish outside Denver." Vasquez went pale. Local stations warned of sub-zero temperatures, whiteouts, and snowfalls unseen since '78. Max, the Chen's German Shepherd, paced the apartment, refusing to leave the twin sides. His amber eyes swept windows and doors, reading threats in the air. Emma sensed it too, an edge in the silence, unfamiliar cars crawling past. Grace had noticed for weeks, hang-up calls, strangers lingering too long in grocery lines. "Grandma, why do you keep looking out the window?" Emma asked. "Just watching the weather, sweetheart," Grace said, hiding her unease. At the station, Detective Maria Santos hit wall after wall. Files missing from secure storage, witnesses recanting. It felt like someone inside the system was staying one step ahead, erasing their progress. At Millbrook General, Daniel Torres pushed to leave his hospital bed. "Something's coming," he told Santos. "Those girls are in danger, and I'm stuck here." Even Millbrook Elementary had changed. Extra locks on classroom doors, staff practicing lockdowns. On the playground, whispers of bad men followed Emma and Sophie. Emma's protectiveness grew. Sophie's drawings darkened, storms with teeth, shadowed figures in the woods. One night, scratch marks appeared around their apartment lock. The building's security cameras had malfunctioned. Max's explosive reaction told Grace it wasn't the wind. The town rallied, neighbors checking in, phone trees, informal patrols. But Morrison's men were professionals who knew how to use chaos as cover. Emma stood at the window, watching snow start to blanket the street. "Sophie, tomorrow we review our emergency plans, just in case." The blizzard arrived like a living thing, swallowing the mountain town in white fury. Wind screamed down streets, snow erased the horizon. Grace's phone rang, her evening shift was cancelled, relief mixed with dread. Emma and Sophie spread homework on the coffee table under battery-powered lanterns. The power had already flickered twice. Max prowled the rooms, his tension ratcheting with every gust. 3 blocks away, Santos fought her patrol car through snow-choked streets. The radio spat emergency calls from across the county, most unreachable. "Maple Street area's out of power," dispatch warned. Santos calculated the distance to the Chens. This was the night. The town's system strained. The hospital ran on generators. Fire trucks couldn't reach calls. Patrol cars were trapped in drifts. In the Chen's building, the ancient heating system gave out. Residents huddled in hallways with blankets and flashlights. Grace made a snap decision, one that would save them. She herded the girls and Max into her bedroom, the smallest space to heat, and set up the emergency space heater. "Emma, help me move the mattresses. We'll all sleep together tonight. Safer." Emma kept the radio tuned to weather updates. Conditions wouldn't improve. Whispered, "I feel like something bad is coming. Not the storm, something else." Emma glanced at Max, still pacing. "He feels it too, but we're ready." At 11:47 p.m., the lights died. Only the lanterns remained, casting long shadows on the walls. The storm's howl filled the silence between gusts. Grace gathered both girls close, whispering prayers in English and Chinese, half hope, half defiance. "Grandma," Sophie asked, "what if the bad men come tonight?" Emma answered before Grace could. "Then we'll be ready. Max will protect us." Outside, in the white chaos, other shapes moved, human, deliberate, and deadly. The storm was their shield. Whether morning would come for the Chen family was far from certain. The blizzard had turned Millbrook into a white wasteland, a perfect shroud for predators to move unseen. 3 figures advanced toward an old brick apartment building with military precision, night vision glowing green through the snow. They were professional killers, using the storm to erase witnesses to a multi-million-dollar operation. Vincent Morrison led with the cold calculation of someone who saw murder of children as routine business. Behind him, Carl Brennan fought a war inside himself. "Boss," Brennan's voice crackled through the comms. "Maybe we should think this through. They're just 9-year-old kids." Morrison's reply was icy. "You remember what happened to the last man who questioned me? Your daughter, Katie, she's about their age. Would be a shame if she had an accident." The threat hit Brennan like a physical blow. His own child was now leverage in a war with no rules. They had already cut the building's power, making the outage look like storm damage. 3 floors above, Max, a retired search and rescue German shepherd, stiffened, hackles high. Emma, reading his signals, whispered to her grandmother, Grace, "Max isn't reacting to the storm. Someone's coming." Grace wanted to dismiss it, but Emma's eyes were sharp, calculating escape routes they'd practiced: fire escape, hallway stairs, basement access. Outside, Morrison's team moved like hunters. 3 blocks away, Detective Maria Santos wrestled her patrol car from a snowbank, instincts screaming that the Chen family faced something far worse than bad weather. Sophie, the quieter twin, sat drawing circles of protection around stick-figure family members. In Brennan's mind, flashes of Katie, reading bedtime stories, playing in the snow, clashed with Morrison's orders. Inside, Max growled at the door. The building's ancient security wouldn't stop professionals. Then came the sound no storm could make: footsteps on the fire escape. Morrison's men entered through the basement with clinical precision. Max erupted, barking and scratching to place himself between his family and danger. Emma's voice was steady. "We're in real danger." Grace moved the girls from the windows. Darkness, as emergency lights flickered and died, cut deliberately. Sophie clung to Emma, whispering prayers in English and Chinese. Max made his choice in a heartbeat, leaving the door to launch into the hallway. His attack on Morrison was vicious, buying seconds of life with blood and teeth. Emma swallowed her heartbreak and led the way toward the bathroom, their planned escape point. Grace grabbed a cast-iron pan, charging toward the fight. Morrison, bleeding and furious, was now driven by personal vendetta. Brennan's last stand came when Morrison turned his weapon toward the children. "I can't do this, Vince. They're just babies." The gunshot dropped Brennan instantly. Morrison stepped over him without slowing. The chase turned the corridors into a battlefield. Max, wounded, rejoined the defense, blocking Morrison's path to the fire escape. Outside, the blizzard swallowed them. Grace carried Sophie, her body shaking from his cold. Emma supported Max, his blood staining the snow. Morrison tracked them with relentless precision. Sophie's condition worsened, skin pale, voice slurring. Emma spotted salvation: an abandoned hunting cabin in Pine Ridge Forest. It was barely standing, but it offered walls against the killing cold. Inside, Emma tore her own clothes for bandages. Grace held Sophie close, whispering prayers. Through the storm, Morrison's voice came, casual and deadly. "I know you're in there. Come out, and I'll make it quick." Emma stood, 4 feet of defiance. "I won't let you hurt my family." Max dragged himself upright, placing his battered body between the children and the killer. Morrison entered, weapon raised, only to freeze at Detective Santos's command. "Drop your weapon, now." Seconds later, Daniel Torres burst in, battered but determined. Tracking the emergency beacon Emma had activated. Backup pushed through the storm. Police, federal agents, medics. Morrison was taken down. The rescue became a race against time. Sophie's hypothermia was critical. Max's wounds life-threatening, and Grace's health fragile. Dawn broke over Millbrook. Clear skies revealing a family alive because a child refused to yield. A dog chose protection over survival, and help arrived in the storm's final hour. Their survival would be remembered as proof that heroes come in the smallest packages and sometimes walk on four legs. The pediatric ward at Millbrook General felt like a fortress built from love and resolve. Medical staff moved constantly, tending to small bodies that had endured horrors no child should face. Emma Chen lay in the bed nearest the window, her bandaged hands resting on frostbitten skin, dark eyes older now from what she'd seen. Beside her, Sophie was connected to warming equipment, her hypothermia monitored in hushed tones. The doctors knew how close she'd come. Hypothermia responded well. But the psychological part, that task fell to child psychologist Dr. Sarah Winters, whose gentle sessions revealed trauma responses seen in children forced into life-or-death choices. Emma, more protective than ever, refused to let Sophie out of her sight. Sophie, once full of words, now spoke only in whispers to Emma or Grace. Grace, 72, stayed at their side despite her own pain. The cold had worsened her arthritis, but love kept her upright. "You need rest," Emma urged. "We're safe now." Still, Emma's vigilance and Sophie's silence concerned staff. 2 floors down, at the veterinary hospital, Max was fighting his own battle. 6 hours of surgery had saved his life after injuries from Morrison's attack, but his prognosis was uncertain. In the adult ward, Daniel Torres wrestled with guilt. "This is my fault," he told Maria Santos. She countered firmly, "You didn't create the danger, you uncovered it." Morrison's network thrived because good people were told to look away. The corruption uncovered went deep. 2 Millbrook officers among 30-plus federal indictments. Media coverage turned the Chen family into national symbols of courage, bringing crowds, security, and overwhelming community support. Meals, transport, counseling. The local school prepared resources for the girls' return. Grace faced crushing medical and veterinary bills, but donations poured in. Daniel's mother brought soup and comfort. Emma processed her trauma through detailed journal entries, grappling with justice and sacrifice. Sophie's art evolved from dark images to scenes of safety and hope. In the family conference room, Grace sat between the twins. Daniel, Maria, and Dr. Winters joined them. "Why did those men try to kill us? Why was Deputy Torres in the forest? Why did they hurt Max?" Emma asked. Daniel explained his investigation into the drug network, his father's disappearance, and the corruption that shielded criminals. "I should have waited for backup," he admitted. Sophie's first words in days were a soft, "Are the bad men gone forever?" Maria reassured her. Morrison and his associates were in custody for good. Grace's anger was aimed at failed systems. Daniel apologized. "I'll carry this for the rest of my life." Emma's forgiveness was simple. You were trying to catch bad people. That's what good people do. Sophie's empathy extended even to Morrison's children. Grace spoke of forgiving without excusing, of justice without revenge. The community's support kept growing. Letters, donations, offers from organizations helping trauma survivors. Media interview. Restore the family unit forged in crisis. When Max returned, the Chen apartment building bloomed into celebration. Ribbons hung from balconies. Hand-painted signs proclaimed, "Welcome." Max limped up the stairs, scars visible, amber eyes bright. Neighbors watched as Emma and Sophie greeted him with gentle hands. Sophie's first full sentence in weeks. "We missed you so much, brave boy." Mayor Patterson honored the family and announced the Emma and Sophie Chen Education Fund to aid children orphaned by tragedy. Emma's speech was humble. "We're not heroes. We just helped when someone needed it. Anyone can be a hero if they do what's right, even when it's scary." Sophie's artwork chronicled their journey from terror to hope. Grace, overcome, thanked the town for turning survival into healing. Daniel, still on crutches, pledged to use their example to improve law enforcement. Maria had become an honorary aunt, her presence a constant reassurance. Educational institutions pledged scholarships for the twins' futures. Max was officially designated a therapy dog, extending his healing to others. Media coverage, carefully managed, carried their message of resilience and the extraordinary power of ordinary people. Sophie's contribution to the media coverage was a simple song she had composed during her art therapy sessions, its melody carrying words about friendship, courage, and hope that reduced grown adults to tears, while capturing the essence of innocence that remained intact despite everything they had endured. The quiet moments after the celebration, when the family found themselves alone in their apartment for the first time in weeks, provided opportunity for reflection on changes that would define their futures. Grace looked around their small home with new eyes, seeing not poverty, but abundance in the love that filled every corner and the support that surrounded them from every direction. Emma's journal entry that evening captured not just events, but evolution. "Today I learned that being famous isn't about people knowing your name. It's about using whatever attention you get to help other people find courage and hope. If our story helps even one person choose to help someone else, then everything we went through was worth it." Sophie's dream journal included drawings of their new life, showing not just their family, but extended circles of support that included Daniel, Maria, Dr. Winters, and countless community members who had proven that heroes come in all ages and backgrounds, but share common commitments to protecting innocence and supporting healing. The evening routine that resumed in their apartment was both familiar and transformed, carrying echoes of normalcy, while incorporating new security measures and support networks that ensured their safety, while promoting their continued healing and growth toward futures that held promise rather than fear. Max's protective positioning remained evident but relaxed, his alert eyes still monitoring for threats, while his aging body settled into the comfortable rhythms of a retirement that had been earned through service above and beyond anything that could have been expected from even the most loyal companion. The twins' bedtime conversation revealed their growing understanding of fame, responsibility, and the normal childhood desires that remained intact, despite experiences that had forced them to mature beyond their years. They were still 9-year-olds who wanted to play games, read books, and dream about futures that might include anything from art careers to medical professions to law enforcement service that would honor the people who had protected them. Their story had become larger than their individual experience, transforming into inspiration for communities across the nation, while remaining grounded in the simple truth that heroes were just regular people who chose to help when help was needed, who chose courage over comfort, and who chose love over fear when darkness threatened to overcome light. The return to Millbrook Elementary School felt like stepping back into a world that had continued spinning while Emma and Sophie Chen's universe had been forever altered by violence, heroism, and survival that belonged in adult nightmares rather than 9-year-old memories. Special security measures had been implemented throughout the building. New locks on classroom doors, additional staff training on emergency procedures, and counselors available at a moment's notice for students who might be struggling with the reality that evil could touch even the safest communities. Emma walked through the familiar hallways with the careful awareness that had become her signature response to environments that required constant vigilance. Her classmates' reactions ranged from awestruck stares to awkward attempts at normalcy, with some children treating her like a celebrity, while others seemed afraid that association with the Chen twins might somehow expose them to dangers they couldn't understand or control. "Emma," her best friend Madison whispered during morning announcements, "is it true that you really saved a policeman's life with just a scarf and a stick?" Emma's discomfort with attention was visible in the way she hunched her shoulders and focused on her textbooks with unusual intensity. "We just did what Grandma Grace taught us. Anyone could have done the same thing if they knew basic first aid." Sophie's challenges were more profound and less visible, manifesting in difficulty concentrating during lessons that had once captured her artistic imagination with ease. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been specially briefed on trauma responses in children and watched carefully for signs that Sophie was becoming overwhelmed by academic demands that now competed with mental resources devoted to processing experiences that challenged adult coping mechanisms. The assembly that announced the school's implementation of the Chen Twin Safety Program was both celebration and educational opportunity, with Principal Anderson explaining that their students' courage had inspired systematic changes that would benefit children throughout the district. "Emma and Sophie Chen have shown us that heroes can be any age, any size, anyone who chooses to help when help is needed." Grace's role as lead instructor for the first aid training program brought her into the school environment in ways that allowed her to monitor her granddaughter's adjustment, while sharing medical expertise that had been honed through decades of professional nursing and personal crisis management. Her patient teaching style and thorough approach to emergency response education earned respect from students and faculty who had previously known her only as the twins' grandmother. Emma's natural leadership abilities emerged as she helped younger students learn safety procedures with the kind of gentle authority that belonged to someone who understood the life-and-death importance of proper emergency response. Her demonstrations of pressure bandage application and emergency communication protocols were delivered with competence that impressed adults, while inspiring confidence in children who might someday need to use similar skills. Sophie's contribution to the school environment came through her art classes, where she shared techniques for using creative expression to process difficult emotions and experiences. Her drawings had evolved to include teaching tools that helped other children understand concepts like safety, protection, and recovery through visual narratives that spoke to young minds more effectively than purely verbal instruction. Playground dynamics had become more complex, with some children treating the twins like fragile celebrities who needed protection from normal childhood interactions, while others appointed themselves as unofficial bodyguards who monitored for potential threats or unkind comments. The balance between special attention and normal treatment required constant navigation by school staff who were learning to support trauma survivors while promoting healthy peer relationships. The bullying incident occurred during lunch period, when a fifth-grade student named Tyler Morrison, unrelated to the criminal who had tried to kill them, made cruel comments about the twins' deceased parents, with the kind of thoughtless cruelty that belonged to children who hadn't yet learned that words could inflict wounds deeper than physical violence. "At least my parents didn't die from some stupid disease," Tyler sneered during a conversation about family traditions. "Maybe if your parents had been smarter, they'd still be alive." Emma's response demonstrated the maturity that had been forced upon her through experiences that had taught her to distinguish between ignorance and malice, between people who needed education and those who chose cruelty despite knowing better. Instead of responding with anger or violence, she stood up with quiet dignity and addressed Tyler with words that carried more authority than any adult intervention could have provided. "Tyler, my parents died trying to help sick people get better, just like we helped Deputy Torres. Being mean about people who died helping others just shows that you don't understand what being brave really means." Sophie's emotional breakdown came later, triggered not by Tyler's cruelty, but by the overwhelming realization that defending their parents' memory required strength she wasn't sure she possessed. The tears that followed were witnessed by classmates who had been moved by Emma's mature response and who rallied around both twins with the kind of genuine support that transformed potential social isolation into deeper friendships. The support system that activated included teachers who had been trained to recognize trauma responses, counselors who understood that healing required time and patience, and peers who had learned that heroes needed the same friendship and understanding that any 9-year-old required to thrive in school environments. Max's therapy dog visits became scheduled events that benefited not just the Chen twins, but other students who were processing their own traumas and challenges. His gentle presence in classrooms provided comfort that transcended species boundaries and reminded everyone that healing often came through connection with others who had survived difficult experiences. The twins' adaptation to their new reality involved finding balance between their enhanced status as community heroes and their fundamental need to be normal children who attended school, completed homework, and developed friendships based on shared interests rather than shared trauma. Emma's academic performance continued to excel, while Sophie's concentration challenges required additional support and modified expectations that honored her artistic gifts while accommodating her healing process. Friendship development had become more selective and meaningful, with both twins gravitating toward classmates who had demonstrated genuine care and support during their most vulnerable moments. These relationships were deeper and more mature than typical 9-year-old friendships, forged through experiences that had taught everyone involved that loyalty and kindness were not just nice qualities, but essential characteristics in people worth knowing. Grace's increased involvement in school activities reflected not just protective instincts, but her growing role as community educator, whose expertise was valued far beyond her relationship to the twins. Principal Anderson's decision to implement a permanent safety education program recognized that the Chen family's experience had revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths that could benefit all students. Represented more than a career change. It was a fundamental reimagining of how law enforcement could serve communities by preventing trauma rather than simply responding to it after damage had already been done. His new office at the Millbrook Police Department had been decorated with photographs of children learning first aid, adults participating in emergency response training, and community members working together to create safety networks that protected everyone through collective vigilance and mutual support. Daniel's physical therapy progress had been steady but humbling, teaching him to manage permanent limitations that served as daily reminders of the price paid for his unauthorized investigation into Morrison's criminal network. His left shoulder would never regain full range of motion, and chronic pain had become a constant companion that medication could manage but not eliminate. Yet these physical challenges had deepened his empathy for others who faced disabilities and limitations while pursuing meaningful work. "The pain reminds me why this work matters," Daniel explained to Maria Santos during one of their weekly coordination meetings. "Every time I feel my shoulder ache, I remember that there are other families out there who might face what the Chens faced unless we do better at prevention and preparation." His relationship with Elena Martinez, the town librarian, had been strengthened rather than strained by the crisis that had nearly cost him his life. Their engagement discussion had evolved from theoretical future planning to concrete commitment based on shared understanding that life was precious and unpredictable, requiring people to choose love and partnership despite risks that couldn't be eliminated through careful planning. Maria Torres, Daniel's mother, had watched her son's evolution with pride that transcended maternal satisfaction and entered the realm of community gratitude. Her boy had survived not just physical attack, but psychological trauma that might have broken someone with less internal strength and external support. His positive impact on Millbrook's children and families provided purpose that transformed survival into service. The safety program launch had attracted attention from law enforcement agencies throughout Colorado, with representatives from other communities requesting information about training protocols and implementation strategies that had proven effective in rural areas with limited resources. Daniel's presentations combined professional expertise with personal experience, creating educational opportunities that resonated with audiences who understood that prevention was more cost-effective than response. Emma and Sophie's roles as junior instructors had been carefully designed to honor their experience while protecting their ongoing healing process. Their participation in training sessions was voluntary and supervised, allowing them to share knowledge that had literally saved lives while ensuring that their contributions felt empowering rather than exploitative. When Emma shows other kids how to make a pressure bandage, Daniel observed to Dr. Winters during a consultation about the twins' involvement in the program, she's not just teaching first aid skills, she's showing them that they can be prepared, capable, and helpful even when adults aren't immediately available. Community response to the safety programs had exceeded all expectations, with neighboring towns requesting assistance in implementing similar initiatives, and state agencies inquiring about expanding the model to address rural crime prevention and emergency response challenges. Daniel found himself traveling throughout the region, sharing expertise that had been purchased with blood and trauma, but that could prevent other families from paying similar prices. His father's case had finally achieved closure with the discovery of Miguel Torres's remains in a remote area of Pine Ridge Forest, allowing the family to conduct proper burial ceremonies and begin healing processes that had been suspended for 5 years while questions remained unanswered. The funeral had drawn law enforcement officers from throughout the state, honoring a man whose death had ultimately led to the exposure and dismantling of criminal networks that had threatened communities across Colorado. Daniel's partnership with Maria Santos had evolved into professional collaboration that combined his community connections with her investigative expertise, creating law enforcement approaches that emphasized transparency, accountability, and community engagement rather than authority and secrecy. Their work together had restored public trust in police services while implementing reforms that addressed systemic problems revealed by Morrison's corruption network. The mentorship role that Daniel had assumed with younger officers provided opportunities to share lessons learned through mistakes that had nearly cost lives, helping others avoid the pitfalls of unauthorized investigations and lone wolf approaches to complex criminal cases. His guidance emphasized patience, teamwork, and proper procedures that protected both officers and civilians while maintaining effectiveness in fighting crime. Daniel's therapy progress in dealing with PTSD and survivor guilt had been supported by professional counseling and community connections that provided ongoing emotional support. His relationship with the Chen family had become a crucial element in his healing process, allowing him to transform guilt about endangering them into gratitude for their courage and commitment to ensuring their continued safety and success. The Sunday dinner tradition that had developed organically had created chosen family bonds that supplemented but didn't replace biological relationships. Daniel's presence at the Chen family table provided Emma and Sophie with positive male role model interaction while giving him opportunities to witness their continued growth and healing. Max's partnership with Daniel in school presentations had proven particularly effective, with the dog's presence adding emotional resonance to safety education that helped children understand that preparation and courage could coexist with love and loyalty. Their joint appearances had become popular throughout the region, inspiring other communities to incorporate therapy animals into emergency response training programs. Elena's acceptance of Daniel's commitment to community service had required adjustment periods and honest conversations about the risks inherent in law enforcement work. But her understanding had deepened through witnessing the positive impact of his programs on families throughout the region. Their wedding planning reflected shared values about service, community, and building futures that honored the past while creating hope for generations to come. The transformation of Grace Chen from struggling grandmother to respected community educator represented one of the most profound personal renaissance stories to emerge from the family's traumatic experience with Morrison's criminal network. Her expertise, which had been undervalued during years of survival-focused existence, was now recognized as an invaluable resource that could benefit entire communities through systematic education and skill development programs. Grace's first aid instruction program had evolved from informal classes at the community center to comprehensive curriculum that was being adopted by schools, businesses, and organizations throughout Colorado. Her teaching style combined decades of professional nursing experience with grandmother's patience and wisdom, creating learning environments where students felt safe to ask questions, make mistakes, and develop confidence in their ability to help others during medical emergencies. "Mrs. Chen doesn't just teach us what to do," explained Janet Morrison, a mother of 3 who had completed Grace's emergency response certification program. "She teaches us why these skills matter and how to stay calm when someone needs our help." Her granddaughters proved that children can save lives if they're properly prepared, and she's making sure all of us have that same preparation. The personal healing that accompanied Grace's professional renaissance was visible in improvements to her physical health, mental well-being, and social connections that had been absent during years when survival consumed most of her energy and attention. Steady income from teaching had eliminated the financial stress that had complicated every decision from grocery purchases to medical care, allowing her to focus on enrichment rather than mere sustenance. Grace's apartment had been transformed from survival space to comfortable home through community donations and her own renewed ability to invest in improvements that reflected hope for the future rather than mere endurance of present circumstances. New furniture had replaced items that had been held together by hope and duct tape, while fresh paint and decorations created environments that nurtured rather than merely sheltered. Emma's advanced interest in medical topics had found enthusiastic support from Grace, whose nursing expertise provided mentorship opportunities that honored the child's intellectual gifts while fostering career interests that might someday benefit communities beyond Millbrook. Their evening conversations about anatomy, physiology, and emergency medicine served both educational and bonding purposes that strengthened their relationship while developing Emma's knowledge base. Sophie's emotional growth had been supported by Grace's increased confidence and community connections, providing the child with examples of resilience and recovery that demonstrated how trauma could be transformed into purpose rather than merely survived. Watching her grandmother receive recognition and respect for knowledge and skills that had always existed helped Sophie understand that healing involved discovering strengths that had been hidden by circumstances rather than creating entirely new capabilities. The writing project that Grace had undertaken, developing a comprehensive first aid manual for families, represented her commitment to ensuring that other children might never face medical emergencies without basic preparation and knowledge. Her collaboration with medical professionals and educational experts was producing resource materials that could serve communities throughout rural America where medical assistance might be hours away during emergencies. Media interviews had transformed Grace from reluctant spokesperson to confident advocate for community preparedness and family resilience. Her appearances on local and national television programs focused on practical emergency response skills, while sharing personal stories that illustrated the importance of teaching children that they could be helpers rather than merely victims when crises occurred. The possibility of romantic relationship with Bill Chen, a fellow volunteer at the community center, who shared her commitment to service and her understanding of loss, represented personal healing that extended beyond professional renaissance to include emotional and social renewal. Their carefully developing friendship provided companionship that honored her memories of her deceased husband, while acknowledging that life could include new forms of love and partnership. Grace's leadership in the Community Garden Project had created opportunities for health and nutrition education that complemented her medical training with practical knowledge about growing, preparing, and preserving foods that supported optimal health and family budgets. Her work with elderly residents, young families, and everyone in between fostered intergenerational connections that strengthened community bonds while addressing practical needs. The grandparent support group that Grace had organized served other older adults who were raising grandchildren due to various family circumstances, providing mutual aid and shared wisdom that helped everyone navigate challenges that were becoming increasingly common in communities throughout America. Her leadership in this area drew on personal experience while utilizing professional skills and community connections that multiplied the impact of individual efforts. Grace's expanded role as youth mentor, community leader, and safety advocate had earned recognition from state and national organizations focused on rural health education and emergency preparedness. Awards and honors provided external validation for contributions that were more importantly measured through lives that had been improved, skills that had been developed, and communities that had become safer and more connected through her work. The full-circle nature of Grace's journey, from struggling survivor to community pillar, illustrated principles about resilience, purpose, and the power of individuals to transform personal challenges into community assets. Her collaboration with Max in community education programs created intergenerational and interspecies partnerships, that demonstrated how healing could ripple outward to benefit entire regions through shared commitment to service and preparation. Future planning had evolved from day-to-day survival strategies to long-term visioning that included considering formal return to nursing practice on a part-time basis, continuing education opportunities that would enhance her teaching capabilities, and legacy building that would ensure her knowledge and wisdom could benefit generations of families who might face their own challenges with greater preparation and confidence. Grace Chen's Renaissance proved that heroes came in all ages and forms, that wisdom earned through hardship could become foundation for community transformation, and that love expressed through service could create ripple effects that extended far beyond individual families to strengthen the social fabric that connected everyone in networks of mutual support and shared hope for better futures. The Colorado State Capitol building rose from Denver's landscape like a monument to democracy and civic virtue. Its golden dome catching morning sunlight that seemed to herald the arrival of heroes who had proven that courage came in packages small enough to carry in 9-year-old hearts, but large enough to inspire an entire state. Emma and Sophie Chen stood at the building's base, craning their necks to take in architecture. Soft green outfit complemented her artistic nature and brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Grace wore her finest church dress, carefully pressed and accessorized with her grandmother's jewelry that had been saved for occasions that demanded respect for tradition and ceremony. The journey to Denver represented the first time the twins had left Millbrook since their parents' death, and its significance wasn't lost on anyone who understood that trauma often made familiar places feel safer than unknown territories. But this trip was different, a celebration rather than a necessity, an honor rather than an obligation, a chance to see that their story had resonated far beyond the mountain town where it had begun. The Capitol building tour provided civic education that transformed abstract concepts about government into concrete understanding of how democracy functioned through buildings, processes, and people who dedicated their lives to public service. Emma's questions revealed tactical thinking that had been honed through crisis experience, while Sophie's artistic eye captured details that most visitors missed. The way light fell through stained glass windows, the craftsmanship in carved wooden details, the sense of history that permeated halls where important decisions had been made for generations. Meeting other honorees provided perspective on the many forms that courage could take in contemporary society. They met firefighters who had saved lives during wildfire season, teachers who had prevented school violence through early intervention programs, and ordinary citizens who had stepped up during natural disasters to protect neighbors and strangers alike. Each story reinforced the truth that heroism was less about spectacular individual acts than about consistent choices to help others when help was needed. Emma's composure during formal interviews impressed media representatives who had expected to find traumatized children rather than articulate young people who could discuss their experience with maturity that belonged to much older individuals. Her responses consistently deflected personal praise while highlighting community support, family preparation, and the importance of teaching emergency response skills to all children. Sophie's artistic gift to Governor Martinez, a drawing that depicted not just their rescue of Daniel Torres, but the broader community of helpers who had supported their family through crisis and recovery, captured the collaborative nature of heroism in ways that words alone couldn't express. The artwork would later be framed and displayed in the governor's office as a reminder of what ordinary people could accomplish when they chose courage over comfort. Grace's leaders. Her own transformation from struggling caregiver to respected educator was reflected in her confident posture and easy interaction with officials who recognized her expertise as well as her relationship to the honorees. Daniel's attendance represented more than professional obligation. His presence as the person whose life had been saved created emotional resonance that transformed the ceremony from simple recognition into testament to the interconnected nature of heroism and service. His uniform bore new insignia reflecting his promotion to deputy chief, but his most important credential remained the debt of gratitude he would always owe to two small girls who had refused to let him die alone in the forest. Maria Santos provided protective presence that had become second nature, her alert eyes scanning crowds and exits with professional awareness, while her heart celebrated the public recognition that Emma and Sophie had earned through courage that continued to inspire law enforcement professionals throughout the region. Her decision to attend represented personal commitment that transcended professional duty and entered the realm of chosen family obligation. Max's special accommodation as certified service dog allowed him to participate fully in ceremonies that might otherwise have excluded animal companions. His calm demeanor and gentle interaction with officials demonstrated the therapy dog training that had expanded his role from family protector to community healer, who helped trauma survivors of all ages find comfort and courage. Governor Martinez's speech highlighted themes that resonated throughout American society. The power of ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things when circumstances demanded heroism. The importance of community support systems that nurtured rather than merely celebrated heroes, and the responsibility of all citizens to choose courage and compassion when faced with opportunities to help others. Emma's acceptance speech was brief but memorable, her young voice carrying across the ceremony with words that would be quoted in newspapers throughout Colorado. We want to thank everyone who helped us learn that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right, even when you are scared. And we want other kids to know that they can be helpers too, if they learn how, and if they choose to care about other people. Sophie's contribution was a self-composed song that reduced grown adults to tears while capturing the essence of family, courage, and hope that had sustained them through their darkest hours. Her clear voice carrying simple lyrics about love being stronger than fear, about help coming from unexpected places, and about heroes being found in every community where people chose to care for each other. The medal ceremony marked the formal conclusion of recognition processes that had transformed local heroes into state symbols, but the bronze medallions engraved with their names would serve as lifelong reminders that their actions had mattered beyond their individual family to inspire systemic changes that would benefit countless other families facing similar challenges. The drive home to Millbrook was filled with discussion about future opportunities and responsibilities that came with recognition at state level. But the twins' excitement focused less on personal fame than on expanded opportunities to help other children learn skills that might someday save lives. The statistics spoke to transformation that extended far beyond individual recognition to encompass systematic change that had rippled throughout Colorado and beyond. More than 500 children had completed basic first aid training through programs inspired by the Chen twins' experience, and success stories continued to accumulate as young people applied learned skills in real emergencies that might otherwise have resulted in tragedy rather than triumph. Emma had grown in more ways than physical height during the years since their recognition ceremony. At 10 years old, she carried herself with confidence that came from understanding her capabilities and limitations, while maintaining humility about her role in community education efforts. Her leadership in peer education programs reflected natural teaching abilities that honored her grandmother's nursing legacy, while developing her own distinctive approach to helping others learn life-saving skills. "When I teach other kids how to help someone who's hurt," Emma explained during an interview for a documentary about their program's expansion, "I always tell them that the most important thing is to stay calm and remember that they already know more than they think they do. Grandma Grace taught us that helping someone is about using what you know and caring enough to try." Sophie's development had been equally remarkable, but expressed through artistic channels that complemented, rather than duplicated, her sister's more clinical approach to emergency response education. Her confidence had been rebuilt through art therapy success that had transformed trauma into creative expression, and her illustrations for safety education materials had become essential components of curriculum used throughout the region. The Chen Twins Safety Center had been established as permanent facility that served not just Millbrook, but surrounding communities that sent children and adults to learn emergency response skills in an environment designed specifically for hands-on education. The building itself had been funded through donations from individuals and organizations that had been moved by the family's story and committed to ensuring that their legacy included practical resources for ongoing community benefit. Max's role had expanded beyond family protection to encompass therapy dog work with trauma victims of all ages, his gentle presence providing comfort that transcended species boundaries and reminded everyone that healing often came through connection with others who had survived difficult experiences. His certification had led to training programs for other therapy dogs, multiplying his impact throughout the region. Grace's position as Director of Community Health Education represented full-circle journey from survival-focused existence to purpose-driven career that utilized decades of nursing expertise while honoring the teaching gifts that had emerged through family crisis. Her programs had been adopted by state agencies and educational institutions throughout Colorado, creating legacy that would benefit generations of families. Daniel's promotion to Deputy Chief reflected not just personal career advancement, but systematic reform implementation that had transformed law enforcement approaches throughout rural Colorado. His leadership in community policing initiatives and emergency response coordination had become model for other departments dealing with similar challenges in areas where resources were limited but community connections were strong. Maria Santos's collaboration with FBI task forces had led to national recognition for rural crime prevention strategies that emphasized community involvement and proactive education rather than purely reactive law enforcement. Her expertise had been requested by agencies throughout the American West, but her commitment remained anchored in Millbrook, where she had found both professional purpose and personal family connections. The Millbrook model had been replicated throughout Colorado and neighboring states, with academic partnerships providing research support that documented effectiveness and refined methods based on empirical evidence rather than anecdotal success stories. Universities had established formal relationships with the program, creating opportunities for ongoing improvement and expansion that ensured sustainability beyond individual personalities or local circumstances. International interest had developed as well, with delegations from countries dealing with similar rural challenges visiting Millbrook to observe methods and adapt approaches to their own cultural contexts. Emma and Sophie had hosted visitors from Canada, Australia, and European nations that were implementing community-based emergency response education programs inspired by their example. The twins' normal life balance required constant attention to ensure that recognition and responsibility didn't overwhelm childhood development and educational progress that remained priority regardless of their public roles. Emma's academic excellence continued to reflect intellectual gifts that were being nurtured through advanced coursework and mentorship opportunities, while Sophie's artistic development provided emotional outlet and creative expression that supported her continued healing and growth. The Chen Family Fund had evolved into a comprehensive scholarship program that supported not just or demonstrated commitment to community service and emergency response education. Recipients included children from throughout Colorado who had shown leadership in peer education programs or who had used learned skills to help others during real emergencies. Max's complete physical recovery had been accompanied by behavioral changes that reflected wisdom earned through service and trauma. His protective instincts remained sharp, but his demeanor had gentled in ways that made him even more effective in therapy dog work, while maintaining the alert awareness that had made him such effective family guardian during their darkest hours. Family stability had been achieved through combination of financial security earned through Grace's teaching work, community support that continued long after initial crisis response, and emotional healing that had transformed survival into thriving. Their apartment had been upgraded to larger space in the same building, maintaining familiar environment while providing room for growth and the extended family connections that had developed through their shared experiences. Annual traditions had emerged organically, safety fairs that brought communities together for education and celebration, memorial services that honored Miguel Torres and other law enforcement officers who had died protecting their communities, and recognition ceremonies that highlighted ongoing heroes whose actions continued to make differences in lives throughout the region. Emma's future interests increasingly focused on medical career possibilities that would honor her grandmother's nursing legacy while utilizing leadership skills that had been developed through peer education work. Her conversations about high school coursework, college preparation, and career planning reflected maturity that balanced ambitious goals with realistic understanding of steps required to achieve them. Sophie's artistic development had found expression through illustrations for safety education materials, but her interests were expanding to include other forms of creative expression that might serve therapeutic purposes for other trauma survivors. Her emotional intelligence and empathy made her natural counselor for other children who were processing difficult experiences through art and creative expression. The memorial dedication at Pine Ridge Forest marked both ending and beginning, closure for tragedy that had claimed Miguel Torres, while opening new chapter of healing and purpose that honored his sacrifice through ongoing commitment to community safety and protection. The bronze plaque, mounted on the oak tree, where Daniel had nearly died, bore simple inscription: "In memory of all who serve and protect, and in honor of those who choose courage when courage is required." The families returned to the forest location where their lives had support. Emma and Sophie walked the familiar trails with Max at their sides, their steps confident rather than fearful, their eyes seeing beauty rather than danger in landscape that had witnessed both violence and heroism. Daniel's presence at the memorial service provided closure that had been years in coming, his understanding of his father's sacrifice finally complete through his own experience of choosing duty over safety, community protection over personal comfort. The investigation that had nearly cost his life had ultimately achieved the justice that Miguel Torres had died pursuing, and the criminal network that had operated with impunity for years had been completely dismantled through coordinated law enforcement efforts. Emma's journal entry that evening captured not just events but perspective that had developed through experiences that had compressed lifetime of growth into single year of extraordinary challenges and opportunities. 1 year ago, I thought being brave meant not being scared. Now I know that being brave means being scared but choosing to help anyway. I thought heroes were special people who were different from everyone else. Now I know that heroes are regular people who make special choices when someone needs help. Sophie's final artwork in her trauma recovery series depicted transformation that spoke to universal themes of healing and hope. The piece showed journey from darkness into light, from fear into courage, from isolation into community connection. Her artistic interpretation of their experience provided visual narrative that would be displayed in the Chen Twin Safety Center as inspiration for other children learning that they could be helpers rather than merely victims when crises occurred. Grace's private moment of thanksgiving at the memorial site reflected gratitude that had been deepened through years of service and recognition. Her granddaughters had not only survived trauma that might have broken adults, but had transformed their experience into community asset that would benefit generations of families. Her own renaissance from struggling caregiver to respected educator had provided purpose and meaning that honored her daughter's memory while creating legacy of service and preparation. Max's behavior in the forest environment reflected trust that had been rebuilt through positive associations and successful experiences that had replaced traumatic memories with purposeful activity. His relaxed but alert demeanor demonstrated wisdom that came from understanding that vigilance didn't require fear, that protection could coexist with peace, and that service to others provided meaning that transcended individual survival. The community gathering that followed the memorial service had become annual tradition that combined remembrance with celebration, honoring sacrifice while recognizing ongoing commitment to values that made such sacrifice meaningful. Residents of Millbrook and surrounding communities came together to renew pledges of mutual support and continued dedication to emergency preparedness that could prevent future tragedies. Future planning conversations had evolved from survival-focused concerns to dream-building discussions about high school preparation, college opportunities, and career paths that reflected both individual interests and commitment to community service. Emma's consideration of medical career that would follow her grandmother's path represented continuity of family tradition, while Sophie's artistic development suggested therapeutic applications that could help other trauma survivors find healing through creative expression. Family dinner traditions had expanded to include chosen family members who had become permanent parts of their support network. Daniel and Elena's engagement announcement had been celebrated at their Sunday table. Maria's decision to make Millbrook her permanent home had been toasted with ginger tea and homemade cookies. And Max's successful training of successor therapy dogs had been honored with special treats and extra attention. The safety program's expansion to neighboring states and national recognition had created opportunities for Emma and Sophie to share their story and knowledge with broader audiences. But their involvement remained carefully managed to ensure that service didn't overwhelm childhood development or family relationships that remained their foundation for everything else they accomplished. Emma's leadership development through speaking engagements and conference presentations had provided skills that would serve her throughout life, regardless of career choices she ultimately made. While Sophie's work helping other trauma survivors through art therapy had revealed gifts that suggested professional possibilities in counseling or therapeutic fields that combined creativity with healing. Max's legacy planning included training programs for successor therapy dogs that would continue serving communities throughout Colorado long after his own service days were completed. His gentle teaching of younger dogs reflected wisdom earned through years of protection and service, demonstrating that heroism could be passed from generation to generation through dedication and love. Grace's health had improved dramatically through purposeful work that provided meaning beyond mere survival. Her energy and vitality reflecting benefits of community connection and professional recognition that honored expertise she had always possessed, but that circumstances had previously prevented from full expression. Her plans for continued education and potential return to formal nursing practice on part-time basis suggested future that balanced service with family responsibilities. The apartment that had once represented desperate refuge from financial insecurity had been transformed into true home, filled with laughter, learning, and love that extended far beyond support that had developed through shared experiences and mutual commitment to helping others. As evening settled over Millbrook and the Chen family completed their bedtime routine that had been restored to peaceful normalcy, their story continued to ripple outward through lives that had been touched by their example. Emma and Sophie's prayers now included gratitude for opportunities to serve others rather than pleas for mere survival. Their dreams encompassing futures filled with possibility rather than limited by circumstance. The legacy of two small hearts had proven that courage comes in all sizes, that love multiplies when shared freely, and that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they choose to help others rather than looking away from need. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that heroes walk among us daily, that children can teach adults about bravery and compassion, and that communities become stronger when individuals choose service over self-interest. The universal message transcended individual biography to encompass eternal truths about human potential for good, about the power of love to overcome evil, and about the responsibility that each person carries to recognize and respond to opportunities for heroism that present themselves through everyday circumstances that require nothing more than courage to choose helping over hiding. In bedrooms throughout Millbrook and beyond, children fell asleep, dreaming of ways they might help others, inspired by proof that heroes came in small packages but made the biggest differences when darkness threatened to overcome light. The bond between Emma, Sophie, and Max reminds us of something profound, that German Shepherds don't just share our homes, they share our hearts. Max's unwavering loyalty, his instinct to protect, and his gentle presence during the twins' darkest hours speaks to what every dog owner knows. These remarkable animals see straight into our souls. There's something almost sacred about the way a German Shepherd positions themselves between their family and the world. Alert, devoted, ready. Max didn't just save lives that night. He showed us what unconditional love looks like when it wears fur and carries a brave heart. If you've been blessed to share your life with a German Shepherd, you understand this connection runs deeper than training or commands. It's about trust, partnership, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone always has your back. For those wanting to strengthen that incredible bond even further, I've discovered something special that might resonate with your heart too. Sometimes the smallest gestures of understanding can transform our relationships with these faithful companions in the most beautiful ways.